Hey, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to take a look at camera cages and kind of give you an overview of why I think that they are useful, and then give you some reasons why, or some negatives for them. So people who are new, this is really for people who are new to videography, and maybe you've been watching a bunch of YouTube videos and see a lot of people with camera cages, and then some people who don't have camera cages, and maybe you're wondering, do you need one or not? So for me, as you can see, I've got, I just hit myself with that one, 3 cameras and 3 cages. So I'm a big camera cage guy, big proponent of the cage. So let's just start. Number one reason, and these are not in really any order of importance or anything like that, but would be to protect your camera from falls, from getting banged around. It could potentially save your camera from a catastrophic injury. Another important thing though is that it could potentially, depending on the cage you get, offer some protection to the ports, to HDMI and USB. So this Tilt-A-Cage has a neat little clamp here where you just leave the HDMI connector, it's mini or micro, I'm not really sure, just locked in there, and then they have the full-size HDMI breakout cable, and then you could also have the USB plugged into that, and then they just get locked in there. So these cameras, a lot of them do have a micro or mini HDMI, which are pretty fragile, pretty flimsy, and over time they're going to wear out and they're going to get loose. But if you have this locked in there all the time, you're not going to get all that wear and tear. And furthermore, if it does get snagged on something, you're not going to rip it out, potentially damaging not only the cable, but more importantly, the actual camera body. Next, they offer tons and tons of mounting points. So when you first get your camera body, typically the only mounting point on most cameras is a hot shoe on the top. Hot shoes are good for connecting things like microphones. You can do, little ball head adapters to attach maybe a little LED light or a little monitor or something, but hot shoes aren't the most, they're not really the strongest, and I wouldn't really add anything too heavy to them because they could slide out, and they also have electronic connections in them that I wouldn't want to damage. So they obviously offer tons and tons of places to mount other accessories onto your camera. So in addition to a microphone, you can mount things like external monitors. If you're doing a wireless lav mic or something like that, you could mount a transmitter to it. You could, just mount an external recorder. You could mount an LED light, like I said before. If you're doing more high-end production and you've got a video transmitter where you've got like a director's monitor or something like that, or maybe even a wireless follow focus, you could have a video transmitter attached to it. So tons and tons of places, and also much more secure mounting options. You've got cold shoes typically on the cage, and then a lot of times there's cold shoes on the handle. This handle here has got cold shoes on the top of the handle and also on the front. This has a 15-inch mounting, a 15-inch rod adapter on it. This has a 15-inch here. So yeah, just tons and tons of places to mount things more securely, and just give you options. So every time you want to rig something to your camera, you have, you can figure out the way that's going to work for you. Next, more handles. Obviously, these cameras have just the side grip built into the body. Mirrorless cameras especially tend to be pretty small. It's hard for me to get a really good grip on these cameras. So having a top handle is just a nice way to pick up and hold, carry your camera, but it's also another way to, hold the camera while you're filming. And then you can also add side grips. So you can add them to the right side, you can add them to the left side, and those come in handy too for stabilizing, handheld shots. Little cameras like the BMP-CC that don't have in-body image stabilization, and having your hands right on the camera body, right on the lens, right on the camera body, you're putting like all of the shakiness from your body, from your hands, from your arms, right into the camera body. And adding more handles that are away from the body of the camera helps dampen a lot of the shakiness that you are, that you can't really control. So they can definitely help out with stabilizing your footage a little bit. So what's next? They make the camera bigger. which goes hand in hand with the handles. They help making it bigger, making it heavier, adding mass to it will help stabilize your handheld shots. Lastly, rigging the camera. So not only adding things to it right onto the cage, but there are base plates that you can get, and you can attach 15mm or 19mm rods to them. You have different lengths depending on what you need. So here, this just attaches via a NATO rail, which you can put on the bottom of the cage, and it just slides in and locks down. So you could have a follow focus, for instance, here. You could put a map box in the front. On the back, you could put a battery plate if you wanted to run a bigger V-mount battery. So if you have a bunch of things on here like transmitters and monitors and the camera, you could power all of that through one battery rather than have individual batteries for everything. You could mount, you could put a shoulder mount on here. So if you are doing a lot of long shoots, shoulder mount will make it, make it a lot easier, more comfortable, also more stable. So, rigging the camera, you need to get a cage. It's going to be the base from which you build out the camera for your needs. Those are the positives, and let's take a look at the negatives real quick. So the first one would be the price. There's a huge range of cages. Some you can get for less than $100. They tend to be more generic and work with like a variety of different camera bodies. But even like small rig, they make camera cages tailored to specific cameras like the GH5 and the BMP-CC, but they just sell the cage by itself, and they're typically less than $100. But they also sell, kits with more and more in it, but they also sell all the individual components. So you can, there's a range involved, but it is an additional price, an additional cost, that you have to consider whether it's worth it or not. But the good thing too is that, like most things with video or film, or even photography, aside from the camera body, a lot of this stuff is going to last multiple generations of camera bodies. So your lenses are going to last, your lights are going to last, other different, other components are going to last for much longer than the camera body itself. So the cage itself is going to go away with the body, but all of the other components and pieces of it tend to have standardized mounting mechanisms. So here you've got NATO rails. This handle here is mounted via an airy rosette. The 15mm rods, like all of these things are standardized. So you can utilize and reuse like all of these components across multiple generations of cameras. So this I can mount to anything with an airy rosette. So I just got this cool little NATO rail to rosette, and you can just put this little NATO rail adapter onto any other cage with a NATO rail, and then just use this handle. So I can use it on the GH5, I can use it on the BMP-CC. Likewise, this piece here that came with the Tilt-A-Cage, once again, it's a NATO rail. So you can just put, like this NATO rail right here, I could slide it right on top of here. Obviously, I'd put it on the bottom of the cage. But anyway, just reusable components. Number 2 is the weight. So that is a positive and a negative. So when you're hand holding, that weight for me is a benefit. But if you have some stabilizers like a Steadicam or a gimbal or something like that, additional weight typically is going to be negative. So you're going to want to strip off pretty much everything. I don't think the cage itself adds a ton of weight, but it does add some weight. The good thing is too, they're usually only connected via 1/4, 20, or 3/4 mount, depending on your camera body, to the camera body itself. So you can just easily unscrew it and slide the body out of the cage. It's not really that big of a or complicated process. It doesn't take long. The least amount of weight is a concern for you, then maybe the cage isn't the way to go. Number 3 is it's just extra stuff to keep track of. So you've got handles, top handles, little adapters, NATO rails, and all of the hardware that might go along with it. I've just got my bag of hardware here. It's just extra NATO rails, extra screws, and all of the Allen wrenches. So if you don't want all of that extra shit to keep track of, maybe you forget it, when you're out on location one day, depending on how organized or disorganized you are, you know, it might be a hassle for you. Okay, last one is ergonomics. So the last consideration would be interfering with controls, potentially also interfering with the grip, just making the camera a little bit less comfortable to use or less comfortable than it was initially designed. If you do a lot of photography, the cage probably gets in the way more than it does for videography. For instance, this tilt-a-cage without the side handle, the elephant ear as I like to call it, it's not as comfortable to grip the body because there's a little pointy part that covers up the bottom corner and it jabs into your hand. It goes right over the top of the mode dial and the custom 1 and 2 buttons. There still is enough space to push them, but you know, it's not as accessible as it is without the cage. The small rig cage for the GH5 is nice. They did a little cutout here, so you can still grip almost the same as without the cage. They did a good job of forming this around the buttons. It's not super easy to hit the record button here, and it's not easy to, once you flip the camera on, to turn it off. But once again, you're not doing that all the time. Likewise, for videography, you're usually setting up the camera before you start rolling a take, right? So you don't really need to access the controls mid-take. Once you stop rolling, then you can fiddle with the controls, and then you just let them go, right? I find that during a take, if I'm actually adjusting anything, it's on the lens, and the cage is not interfering with the lens at all. Once again, it's up to you how you like to film. If you're doing a lot of photography, then the cage might be a hindrance. Speaking of ergonomics, like I said, there's different ways you can mount handles. You can mount handles to the right side, you can mount handles to the left side. Some people don't like them on the right side because, once again, you're taking your hand further away from the controls on the body of the camera. But like I just mentioned, you're not really operating the controls while you're in a take. I do like having the handle on the right side for me because I like operating the lens with my left hand. But anyway, that's all preference, and you can set it up however you want to. So I think that's it. Hopefully, this is like the 20th time I've tried to record this video. Hopefully everything's working right now. So thanks for watching this video, and hope you found it useful. One other thing I wanted to mention is, speaking of the Airy Rosette, not only is it like a standardized mounting system so you can reuse it a lot, but it's also adjustable. So when you are filming, you can easily rotate the handle to different angles to make it more comfortable for you. So if you're filming over your head a lot for a long time, you can just rotate the handle and you can see how your wrist is straight. Likewise, if you're holding it down low, you can rotate the handle to make it more comfortable for you. It might not seem like a big deal, but if you're doing something for a long time, it definitely is going to add up to pain on your body.